Now, when we think of countries facing a humanitarian crisis, I guess places like Syria, the one I've just mentioned, probably come into our mind the most, with good reason too, of course. But journey several thousand kilometres to the southwest of Syria and you'll reach the Central African Republic. It's a country that the UN says is experiencing total breakdown in law and order, and it's also described as a serious threat to regional stability. Here's why. The Central African Republic is home to more than 4.5 million people, and it's rich in agriculture and minerals, but rife corruption means that the benefits that those could bring are not what they might be. Since its independence from France in 1960, the Central African Republic has endured several coups, and while some progress towards stability has been made, last December, Seleka rebels took over several towns and the country once again plunged into crisis. In January, peace talks failed and the rebels re-entered the capital Bangui, forcing President Francois Bozize to flee. Since then, more than 200,000 people have fled their homes. Lootings and killings have been widely documented. Women are said to have been killed for refusing to have sex or surrender their food, and men have been executed, tortured, or have disappeared.
They shot at me and I got 2 bullets. The first entered here and came out there. The second entered here and is still stuck in my chest.
Of the children growing up in the Central African Republic, more than 100,000 are said to be at risk of sexual abuse, disease and recruitment into armed groups. And despite assurances that armed militia have been removed from the streets, the army's actually been disbanded and there are only 200 police left in the entire country. Little wonder the UN has declared the whole population as victims and the country one of the world's most dangerous destinations. Well, let's talk about the Central African Republic now with Kristalina Georgieva, European Commissioner for International Cooperation, Humanitarian Aid and Crisis Response. She's live from Washington, D.C., but just back from CAR. Here in the global studio with me is Teya, president of a charity that represents the CAR diaspora in the UK. And from the charity War Child, Kate Adams is here, and you've got a report coming out tomorrow, I know, on the situation in CAR. Well, Kristalina Georgieva, if I could start with you in Washington, D.C. I was mentioning you've just been to the Central African Republic. The vast majority of our viewers will not have been there. Tell us about it.
It is one of the most destitute places I have visited, and I have been to South Sudan, to Somalia. The country has suffered long from neglect, but it has never been as bad as it is now. In the capital, Bangui, the situation has normalized somewhat, but you get out of Bangui and it is complete chaos. The state has collapsed. I was in Kagabandoro, 26,000 mud houses, provincial capital. The local hospital has been looted, and when you go in, there's nothing, no medicine, no equipment, no electricity, no food, not even mattresses on the beds. The 3 health workers there, unpaid for months, but brave to stay. The one woman that I talked to who just arrived giving birth to a surprisingly very healthy baby boy, I asked her, "How do you feel?" Her answer was, "I'm hungry." The desperation is so high that now people there are asking over and over, how come the world has forgotten we exist? And I think it is paramount that we prove we have not forgotten this country, because 3 steps: more security, more effort to help demilitarize, get basically armed men out of the streets, and more humanitarian assistance can turn the fate of the Central African Republic, so we don't look back a couple of years from now saying, how did we allow another Somalia to happen?
Well, you paint a desperate picture, Kristalina. Catherine, in the conversations you have with friends and relatives back home, do they match what Kristalina's just described?
It definitely matches what she's been saying. A lot of people are still living there, even though a lot have actually fled the country. I've got family members who had to leave because they couldn't stand the situation anymore, and they were very scared and frightened for their children in particular. So I would say that this is a true picture of the situation. People are really desperate for help.
And was it like this when you were a child? I mean, what are your memories of being in CAR? What are the memories of your friends and family? Has it changed?
I lived in the CAR for 10 years, and I have very good memories of my time there. So I would say that things have completely changed. But I would like to point that the reason why my family had to leave the CAR in the first place in 1994 was because of the same kind of situation, political unrest. So it's like it's a repetition of events.
And War Child has been looking at the experiences of children. Unfortunately, children all over sub-Saharan Africa often face challenges they might not if they were born elsewhere in the world. But is there a particular problem in CAR at the moment?
Absolutely. I think it's like Kristalina just said, it really is because they're so neglected. People haven't heard of the country, they don't know that children are suffering there, and unfortunately the donor community isn't responding. They say CAR, you know, it's a Francophile country, but the other donors are not stepping up.
So you think that's the reason, that the onus is maybe on France to raise the profile?
I do. I mean, I've had conversations to that effect, and I think that if donors don't step up and do something about CAR, there is going to be a regional crisis. It's just on the cards now.
Well, Kristalina, let's talk about this issue some more. What must the UN and other bodies do to get the world to pay attention?
Well, first, the United Nations Security Council must focus on the Central African Republic for the sake of people there, but also for the sake of regional stability. In September, when they meet again, they just met a couple of days ago, they must decide on a strong support for the peacekeeping force that the African Union has pledged to triple. That support would be enormously important for the country to have a chance for the state to return outside of Bangui. Secondly, we must help the transitional government, the transitional president, like it or not, he is now sworn as such, to be able to demobilize the fighters. We have done it, the world has worked on this successfully in other places. We must, in a very determined fashion, do it in the Central African Republic.
Kristalina, let's pick up on this. You're saying like it or not, he's the
money.
Kristalina, let me just jump in here, because you're saying like it or not, he's the president. But you're quite right. A lot of people don't like it. And Catherine, a lot of people don't want the African Union acknowledging this man as the leader. He, after all, drove out the previous president. A lot of people say shun him. What approach would you recommend?
I think that the approach that has been recommended to date is that he should lead the country for the time being. But after some time, that means after a few months.
Well, he says he's going to go in 2016, doesn't he, in elections then?
Yes, this is the agreement for the moment, but we don't know what is going to happen because we know how it works. Usually when someone comes to power, they barely want to leave afterwards. So we just hope that better things will come.
And your hope at War Child is obviously that things get better for children. Do you believe the president's part of the solution or he's part of the problem?
I'd prefer not to go into politics, really. I mean, our whole mandate is to stay completely independent.
You have to, don't you? Because your access to that country is, to some degree, controlled by the government.
Absolutely, but we have to make sure that we're in a position with all the kind of different conflict parties to make sure we can deliver humanitarian aid, and that's something that's not happening at the moment. There is not passage of aid, and that's really our main priority, is to do advocacy towards all those conflict parties to make sure that children are able to access services. I mean, there's 600,000 children without food, water, any of the basic services they need to survive. And even before this crisis, there were so many street children, and all the statistics you've already said, you know, 1 in 10 children die before their first birthday.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Kristalina too. Catherine, just before we wrap up, I wonder, do you ever think about going back home to live, or is that something that's off the agenda?
To live, I would consider doing it, but the country needs to be stable. There needs to be peace for us to come back, and there needs to be also work opportunities for young people like me.
And that's a big if. Thank you very much to all three of you for joining us.